Let's talk herd. Yeah, so I kind of wanted to ask you, it really interests me because I went back to do a clinic. I think it was around 2015, something like that. And at the time, my sister and I were doing these, what we called holistic clinics. And we were, doing like, bringing different things into it. So I would do some craniosacral therapy and we'd look at the horse's feet and we'd kind of advise the whole situation. And when I went to England, it was like, I mean, my friend organized it for me. So I just felt like at the time we couldn't introduce that. It just wasn't like, there wasn't any demand. And most of the horses were shod and clipped and quite stressed. It was that you've got half an hour to teach someone and that's it. And I just wondered if it's because I was quite surprised at that. Because I thought, I don't know why, but I kind of thought it would have become a bit more, evolved maybe is the word. I don't know. Because, I mean, it's sort of similar in France because there's club system and it's kind of a bit like the riding school and the competitive world are together. And so, yeah, I just wanted to ask you if it's changed, if there's more.
How long ago
More
was
of
that,
a.
Camille?
It was like 2015, 16. So it was, yeah, like a little while ago. And
And
I
I
haven't
mean,
been back
where,
since. So,
I mean, I've been operating here, in Stroud, just outside Gloucestershire, for about 20 years. And
yeah,
of the, maybe because of the path I've taken to get here, I've never had that issue. I, we were practicing cranial osteopathy with horses 20 years ago.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I guess it's the channels you come in by. Does that make
yeah,
sense? So
definitely.
for
Yeah.
me, I've always chosen to walk paths that are slightly outside normal parameters. That's kind of who I am. I don't do things in a traditional way.
Yeah.
Um, so for example, to get to where I am now, one of the first things I did more than 20 years ago was a 7-day shamanic way of the
Wow.
horse course.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, and around about the same time is when I came across the books by Linda Kahanov, The Tao of Equus and
Yeah.
Riding with Your Mind, and she is the person who really introduced this the way we work with the horses with people is
Yeah.
Linda is the person who brought that more widely into the world, if you like.
Hmm.
So though so you know so those channels have always been
Yeah.
there for me. So
I
yeah,
guess
I
it's
guess
just
I don't
like,
know
yeah, it's more.
how you
I'm just interested as to whether there's more integration happening now because it seems to be like it's so divided. There's that traditional world, and then there's people like you. And, is it beginning to kind of, is there any crossover happening?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And you mentioned the word evolution, and and I you know and I think that is happening. There is a general, I think, evolution in consciousness, um, in many ways, and I certainly do see it in the
Yeah.
horse world. Um, it's quite interesting for me because where I am, where I keep my horses, on all sides there are very traditional yards,
Yeah.
And just across the field from me is Princess Anne and her estate, the Gatcombe
Wow.
estate. And
Yeah.
we yeah, we're like a little oasis of kind of muddy, hairy horses, you
Yeah.
know, and everybody around us is practicing traditional methods. But
Yeah.
that in this area, within a sort of maybe 5 mile radius of this spot that I'm sitting in right now, talking to
Yeah.
you, there are three centres such as mine.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it's like, I've heard it described as a sort of, if the planet is an organism, and the cells, the good cells are multiplying,
Yeah. Yeah.
the nourishing cells are multiplying. And I just, what is really dear to me, and what is really important to me, is to understand that there is no judgment anywhere. I am not
Yeah.
judging the people who
Yeah.
ride their horses past my yard with flash nosebands and curb chains and
Yeah.
martingales and
Yeah.
whips and spurs. And I am not judging those people, because
Yeah.
everybody is on their own path, and they will
Exactly.
find their own way, and
Yeah,
the best I
exactly.
can do is pay attention to myself, you know
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that's how I like to operate. So I don't look at them and think, how terrible, let me stop my car and shout at them. I'm not
Yeah.
going to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a challenge sometimes, that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Because I suppose I kind of asked that because I feel that things really are changing now. That we're like kind of there's this wave that's building, but then I don't really know if that's just because I'm in my world, and I don't kind of look outside of it that much. So, yeah, it's interesting to
Yeah.
get your perspective. And I think it
Yeah.
really is. I think people are
Sometimes,
just going yeah. And I think it's like you say, it's a going
yeah,
inward. It's not, it's a starting to listen to just what feels good between us and the horses. And it's so powerful
yeah,
because they can, they're the ones who have the answers in a way, or can mirror how
yeah.
we feel. So, how did you start? Like, what was your beginnings with horses? Like, how did you become more holistic, or, understand more about the herd and empowerment? And what kind of triggered that for you, would
Um,
you say?
I had horses in my blood, when I was a tiny child,
Mm,
that as soon as I could sort of hold a pencil, I would
yeah.
draw them. But I'd never seen one,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not in real life. And I just had this, as soon as I, did have an encounter with a horse, I really wanted to kind of, know more about them, and be around them and learn to ride, and I had a very sympathetic stepfather who enabled me to do those things. And when I was
Yeah.
9, uh, he enabled me to have a share in a little Exmoor pony. And when I was
Okay.
14, he bought me my first, true, proper horse, who was an Arab called Whisper. And
Yeah.
and then I was in the traditional world, and when we moved
Yeah.
to this area, I had a job as a yard manager at a local riding school, and that's where
Yeah.
I really learned how not to do it, you know.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not judging
Absolutely.
anybody, okay? But that's where I learned this is how not to do things. Because I experienced the horses to be very dissociated, very shut down, not present, because they had to go to that place in order to kind of survive where they are. And many of them exhibited, neurotic behaviors because they were standing in stables for hours all day long. So they were weaving and they were crib biting and wind sucking and box walking, and and a couple of them were quite aggressive. If you walk past the stable, they were, coming lunging over the door, and that's where, I decided that I need another way of being with horses.
So how did you? Yeah, I was just going to say, because that really interests me. Like, how did you know that was wrong, or just that there was a different way that the horses could be? Because that's what your experience was at the time.
Interesting question. How did I know it was wrong? I guess because my body was giving me very strong signals that this was not okay. So, much tension and disturbing feelings in my heart and in my gut. And so then I'm wondering what those feelings are about. And then I'm realizing that I'm resonating with the distress of the horses and with the sort of general. I mean, this riding stables is a very busy riding stables. 200 people coming through there, weekly or whatever. Lessons are half an hour back to back. Craziness.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, how I realized it was wrong. And from the horses' behaviors, as I say, that the fear in them, the fear was palpable. And this is a traditional yard where there are whips being used and spurs being used and all sorts of gadgets being used. Let's hold the pony's mouth closed with the flash noseband so he can't process his emotions. So they go within, and then eventually there's an explosion. And that's how I realized it was wrong. And at the time that was coming to me, I'm very kind of aware of our relationship with the universe, and with the flow of things. And, at that time, the universe arranged it so that both Monty Roberts and Pat Pirelli were in Gloucestershire, giving demonstrations of their horsemanship. And this was, as I say, about 25, 30 years ago. And so I went to those demonstrations. Within a week, I saw both of them, Monty Roberts and Pat Pirelli. And that opened my eyes, back in the day, back then. Those were the trailblazers. Those were the people who were bringing this new, it's not a new way, an ancient way of being with horses. But, they were bringing it, reintroducing it. And of the two demonstrations that I saw, I resonated most with Monty. So then I did their intelligent horsemanship training. And, as I say, that was about 25 years ago, and I have evolved, myself and my awareness, and again, no judgment here, but there is still within the natural horsemanship umbrella, we still have to be very careful how we are practicing with those principles.
Yeah.
Advance and retreat, pressure and release. Still pressure,
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is the ethic? I'm always questioning, is it ethical, to say
Yeah.
to a horse, okay, come out of the herd where you're feeling most secure. Let
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
disrupt your security, bring you
Yeah.
out, isolate you from other members of your kind, and ask you to do
Yeah.
something for me, or get
Yeah.
you to do
Yeah.
something for me.
Yeah.
Whatever method you're using,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
a real growth edge for me at the moment, and a learning curve that I'm on, and I'm really questioning all things, all of that.
Yeah.
But back in those days, 25 years ago, that's what
Yeah.
we had
Yeah.
as a new way of looking at things,
Yeah.
and
Just another
so that's
perspective.
what happened. That's how
Yeah.
I yeah stepped into a different path then.
Yeah. I remember, yeah, I had the same sort of experience because I saw Monty Roberts at Glen Eagles, which is a kind of it's a traditional kind of yard, but it's quite fancy. At the time it was kind of ahead of its time because it had a fancy indoor school, and it was, and he went there, and it was a real eye opener, and I kind of went all in, at that time, and then I started to just have some concerns, mainly with actually, because what I noticed was the ones that I could really connect with through that method, or connect better, were the ones that I wasn't that connected with to start with, but the ones that I already had a strong bond with. It was almost like they were like, "What are you doing? Why are you pushing us away?" And so, yeah,
Yes.
I'm a very similar, to where you are. And I decided about when we moved here to this farm, I decided to completely trust the dialogue and just say, right, this is my opportunity to let everything go, every technique approach, and just say, right, I'm just going to follow the dialogue. And then that's a whole thing as well in itself, because like, what is the dialogue? How do you, and I wanted to ask you that as well. Like, how do you communicate? What is your particular method of hearing what they're saying and then acting on it? And so that's a whole, that's fascinating as well. So you wrote about that with the autistic children, and it's fascinating. Like how does that come to you? How do you communicate? Because we talk all the time about, listening to horses, but can you define how you listen? Are you receiving thoughts, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's another really good question. And it's very difficult to articulate
Yeah.
how it goes. I think it's very dependent on, again, who you are as an individual.
Yeah.
How are you listening to you? How are you listening to you?
Yeah.
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 I can't differentiate between that. I can't make a distinction between how I'm listening to myself and receiving the world,
Yeah.
and how I'm listening to horses. I'm trying to think of,
Yeah.
a specific example of something. And
What about what
if your
comes
mind
into
goes
my
back.
mind is, yeah,
Yeah.
what about that when
I think
you wrote, because you wrote about the man, and he had the mare Moth came to him, and
Oh
she was working
yes,
with him, and yeah, and you thought about his mother, or the whole mother thing,
yes.
and you
Well,
asked him about
she
that.
this little horse Moth. she when she was born, Moth, her mother died, and she was hand-reared. She was orphaned. And what I've discovered is that if you have a very close relationship with your herd, if you know them really well,
Yeah.
They horses will step forward for specific issues. So when it's about relationship with mother or mothering, in my herd, it's Moth that steps forward. So a person can come and say they've come to work on their anger issues or their lack of direction or why their relationship is not working, and they can come with their presenting symptom. But if it's Moth that comes out of the herd and says, I'm, it's me, I will know that must ask them about their mother. And astonish, it's that's the magical piece of it, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's more of a kind of like something that you build over time, a kind of really strong bond that you have with the whole herd, and you know where they fit into that. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and I think
I would.
One of my other kind of discoveries around this is that if you're going to have that purity of communication between you and the horses, they have to live in an empowered way as possible. They have to have as little human interference as possible. And we talk a lot about authenticity in this work. What is authentic? And you can have one horse, and you can keep that one horse on a traditional livery yard because that's all that's available to you. But if you're authentic within that, it will work for you.
Yeah.
By the same token, you can have 7 horses and you can keep them in hundreds of acres, but if you're not living yourself an authentic, congruent life, it's also going to be impeded.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
So it does, for me, again and again, it comes back to myself. How am I living my life? How am I listening to the universe? How well am I listening to the universe? How well am I listening to me? And it very much comes down to that.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. Yeah, it makes me think of because I've noticed over time that the more balanced I am in myself, like emotionally, and the more I'm kind of listening and just connecting to my source, the healthier the horses are, and they just don't have any issues. And part of that for me was letting go of the idea that there has to be something to fix, that there has to be something to heal, or because I was kind of, when I started doing the craniosacral therapy, there is a sort of thing that comes along with that you feel like you're a healer. And I think you kind of have to let that go. Like, that there's always something to heal, and in a way that's a kind of potential, and you like that. It's good. It feels like, it's sort of fulfilling. But I realized that I don't really feel like that about my horses anymore. Like I don't, or the horses that I am the guardian of. I don't feel like I'm their healer, or even that kind of they're mine. It's like we just, it's like we're kind of balanced about that. And that doesn't mean we don't do things. We do, but it's not like there's a this kind of perpetual lack, of kind of things being right. It's just it's almost like you kind of just got to accept that everything's good and that, everybody's balanced, and then they will be balanced. And so that's been a kind of learning curve for me as well.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of coming through from what you were saying.
You spoke about the dialogue, and being open to the dialogue and following that. And I think that's extremely important. And in the equine, facilitated human development work that Linda Kahanov brought through, we use various psychological frameworks because when you observe a session between a human and a horse, there is so much information in it, so much data that's coming through on so many different levels. The cognitive, the feeling, the instinctive, it's all coming at the same time. And so we use certain psychological frameworks to try to make sense of that information.
To interpret.
One of the frameworks that we use is the Cartman drama triangle, where you have the rescuer, the victim, and the persecutor. Okay. And this, if you're identifying with being a rescuer, for example, or a fixer or a healer, if you're identifying with that role, then you have to have, a victim, a patient, a client.
Exactly,
But the trick is, that might be the relationship that you're having, but the trick is to not identify with that role.
Yeah.
Maybe, because as you say, if you're thinking that your horse's healers, then they have to be sick.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's not the way of it. And it's a two-way dialogue. That's the point I wanted to make about the dialogue was, a dialogue is a two-way thing.
Absolutely.
And it's equal. What they're bringing to you is just as valuable, just as powerful as what you think you're taking to them.
Yeah. That's been a big one for me, a big kind of revelation. Definitely. It's almost like there's this kind of thing about, how people talk about the war on terrorism and the war on drugs, and there's a lot of resistance in that. And I think that's the kind of turn that we have to, that's really positive to be able to make, is to turn away from resisting things, like resisting problems and resisting, anything that we consider as a lack or needs to be healed. I think it's more of a just kind of, letting going with the flow of healing, really, because that's what healing, in a way, healing is just the natural balance of things. It's like how things are, really.
Yeah.
The source of things. Yeah.
That's right.